We all love wrestling drama, the betrayals, the comebacks, the whole shebang. But what happens when the drama spills over and the company starts disrespecting the very people who built it? Yeah, WWF's had a few of those moments. Here are 10 times WWF disrespected its own legends. Back in 1997, Bret "Hitman" Hart was one of the biggest stars in wrestling. He had been a 5-time WWF champion. Fans adored him, especially in Canada, where he was seen as a national hero. People admired his technical skill in the ring, his dedication to the business, and the way he carried himself with pride. But behind the scenes, things were not as perfect as they seemed. Bret had made a huge decision. He was leaving WWF and joining WCW, the company's biggest rival. But there was a major issue. He was still the WWF champion. Vince McMahon, the owner of WWF, could not let his champion walk away with the title. Usually, wrestlers agree to lose the belt before leaving, but Bret had one condition. He did not want to lose to Shawn Michaels. Bret and Shawn had real-life problems. They had been rivals in the ring, but outside of it, there was genuine bad blood between them. They had exchanged insults, personal attacks, and had little respect for each other. Bret did not want to lose to Shawn, especially in front of his Canadian fans at Survivor Series, one of WWF's biggest events of the year. So they made a plan. The match would end in disqualification, meaning Bret would keep the title a little longer and drop it later. But Vince McMahon had other plans. During the match, Shawn Michaels put Bret in the sharpshooter. This was Bret's own signature move, a submission hold that he had perfected. Suddenly, before Bret had the chance to break out of the hold, the bell rang. The match was over. Bret had lost the title. But he never tapped out. He never gave up. He had been tricked. The crowd was stunned. No one understood what had just happened. Bret was in shock for a moment, but then rage took over. He realized he had been betrayed. He turned to Vince McMahon, standing near the ring, and spit right in his face. Then in a fit of fury, he smashed cameras, flipped over the announcer's table, and stormed backstage. Backstage, emotions were boiling over. Bret confronted Vince in the locker room. There were heated words exchanged. Then with one solid punch, Bret knocked Vince to the floor. The betrayal and the chaos of that night became known as the Montreal Screwjob. It was one of the most controversial moments in wrestling history. Fans felt betrayed. Bret had given so much to WWF, and yet this was how he was treated on his way out. It took over 10 years for Bret to forgive Vince and return to WWE, but for many fans, the wound never fully healed. Fast forward to 1999, and WWF made another move that left fans disappointed and disgusted. Then, in 1999, WWF had a storyline that many fans still talk about today. It was about Al Snow, a wrestler known for his odd personality, and the Big Bossman, a tough and mean character. At first, their feud was like any other, but then it took a turn that shocked everyone. The Big Bossman kidnapped Al Snow's pet dog, Pepper. Fans thought it was just another way for a bad guy to mess with his opponent. But things got worse. One day, Bossman told Al Snow that he had not only killed Pepper, but had also cooked the dog and fed it to him. Al Snow looked heartbroken. The fans were disgusted. Even though wrestling was known for crazy storylines, this one was too much. Using animal cruelty as part of the story was something many fans could not accept. It also felt cruel to Al Snow himself. If he really loved his dog, then this storyline went beyond acting. It was personal. It seemed like WWF only cared about shock value, not how the storyline might affect the wrestlers or the fans. To this day, people still talk about this as one of the worst storylines ever. But this was not the only time WWF pushed things too far. Just a year earlier, in 1998, another storyline made headlines for all the wrong reasons. D-Generation X was one of the most popular groups in wrestling during the late 1990s. They were known for breaking rules, making fun of others, and doing whatever they wanted. But one night, they did something that crossed the line. They were feuding with a group called the Nation of Domination, which had mostly black wrestlers, including The Rock. To make fun of them, members of DX dressed up like the Nation. But instead of just copying their mannerisms, they took things way too far. X-Pac, who was pretending to be Mark Henry, painted his face black. The other DX members exaggerated the way the Nation spoke and acted. The whole thing was offensive and racist. At the time, some people laughed it off, but looking back, it was completely unacceptable. Blackface has a long history of being used to mock and insult black people. Seeing it on a major wrestling show shocked many fans. It also made Owen Hart, who had recently joined the nation, look foolish. The whole segment felt mean-spirited. World Wildlife Fund probably thought this would make DX seem more rebellious. Instead, it just made them look disrespectful. Even though wrestling often pushes boundaries, this was a moment that should never have happened. Today, people still look back at this segment as one of wrestling's biggest mistakes. Next, we have something about our boy Dusty. Dusty Rhodes was one of the biggest stars in wrestling before he joined WWF in the late 1980s. He had built a legendary career in NWA and WCW, where fans loved him for his toughness and charisma. He was known as the American Dream, a man who connected with working-class fans because he spoke their language and represented their struggles. But when he arrived in WWF, everything changed. Instead of letting him be himself, the company gave him a completely different look: polka dots. It was nothing like his old rugged image. If that wasn't bad enough, they also made him appear in segments where he worked regular jobs, including cleaning toilets. Fans who had watched him dominate in other wrestling promotions couldn't believe what they were seeing. It felt like WWF was mocking him, trying to take away the image he had built for himself. Many believed this was WWF's way of humiliating him because he had come from a rival company. Dusty had spent years proving he was one of the best, but now he was wearing polka dots and playing a character that felt more like a joke than a legend. Even though the situation wasn't ideal, Dusty didn't let it break him. He embraced the gimmick and still won over the fans. His natural charisma made the polka dots work, and the audience continued to love him. But the way WWF treated him showed a pattern. Instead of celebrating the history and success of wrestlers from other promotions, they often seemed more interested in humbling them. Dusty was just one of many who had to go through this. Years later, in 2006, another legendary performer was treated in a way that many saw as completely disrespectful. Lita was one of the most important women in WWE history. She changed the way people looked at women's wrestling with her high-flying moves, unique style, and fearless attitude. But when she announced her retirement, WWE didn't celebrate her incredible career. Instead, they embarrassed her in front of the world. At Survivor Series 2006, after her final match, the tag team Crime Time came to the ring and started auctioning off her personal belongings. They held up things like her underwear, a vibrator, and yeast infection cream, turning her farewell into a cruel joke. The crowd laughed, but many fans at home were shocked at how WWE was handling her send-off. It wasn't just unnecessary, it was mean-spirited. Reports later revealed that Lita was extremely upset and had tried to get the segment changed, but WWE ignored her. Rather than giving her a proper farewell, WWE turned her retirement into a tasteless comedy skit. Some fans believed WWE was punishing her because of personal controversies, but whatever the reason, it was a terrible way to treat someone who had done so much for the company. It was yet another example of WWE disrespecting its talent, especially when they were on their way out. A year before Lita's retirement, WWE had done something else that upset many fans. In 2005, they released a DVD called The Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior. The Ultimate Warrior was one of the biggest stars of the late 1980s and early 1990s. His energy, his intense personality, and his colorful look made him one of the most memorable wrestlers of his time. But his relationship with WWE had always been filled with problems. He had disagreements with management, sudden departures, and a reputation for being difficult to work with. Instead of focusing on his accomplishments, WWE used the DVD to tear him down. It featured interviews with WWE figures like Vince McMahon, Bobby Heenan, and Triple H, all of whom had negative things to say about Warrior. They criticized his attitude, his in-ring ability, and his personality, making him look like a failure. Fans who had loved Warrior were outraged. Many saw the DVD as a hatchet job, a way for WWE to destroy his legacy and make him look bad. Warrior himself was furious. He even filed a lawsuit against WWE for defamation, but the case was dismissed. Regardless of the legal outcome, the damage was already done. WWE had used its platform to completely attack a former star. While it was true that Warrior had issues behind the scenes, the way WWE handled it felt more like revenge than an honest documentary. Even years later, WWE continued to show a lack of respect for certain legends. One of the most recent examples involved Bill Goldberg, a wrestler who had made a huge impact in WCW during the Monday Night Wars. Goldberg was one of the most dominant stars in wrestling history. He had an undefeated streak that made him a legend, and his intensity made him a fan favorite. Later, he returned to WWE for several runs, but according to him, WWE failed to keep an important promise. In a 2023 interview, Goldberg said he had a handshake understanding with Vince McMahon about getting a proper retirement match. After his match against Roman Reigns at Elimination Chamber 2022, he expected one final match to officially end his career, but it never happened. Goldberg didn't hold back his frustration. He felt disrespected and believed he had earned a real farewell. Retirement matches are usually a big deal. They give fans a chance to say goodbye and give wrestlers a chance to close their careers on their terms. But WWE never followed through, leaving Goldberg disappointed. He even mentioned the idea of wrestling outside WWE just to get the proper send-off he felt he deserved. His story was a reminder of how uncertain things can be in the wrestling business. Without a written contract, even a legendary performer like Goldberg could be left behind. It was another example of WWE failing to properly honor the stars who had helped build the industry. Coming to our next controversy, we have Randy Orton. Randy Orton's journey to becoming one of WWE's biggest stars wasn't just about having the right skills or coming from a legendary wrestling family. It was about finding the right character, the right attitude, and the right way to stand out from the crowd. In the early 2000s, WWE gave him that opportunity with the Legend Killer gimmick. It was a bold and controversial move, one that turned Orton into one of the most hated villains in wrestling, but it also raised questions about how WWE treated its past stars and whether they were doing right by the legends who had built the company. At the time, Orton was young, cocky, and had something to prove. He wasn't just another wrestler trying to make it big. He was a third-generation superstar. His father, Cowboy Bob Orton, and his grandfather, Bob Orton Sr., were both well-respected in the business. But Randy didn't want to live in their shadow. He wanted to carve out his own legacy, and the best way to do that was to take down the biggest names in the business. That's when WWE gave him the Legend Killer persona, and everything changed. The idea was simple but ruthless. Orton wasn't just going to wrestle against WWE's legendary superstars, he was going to humiliate them, disrespect them, and prove that their time was over. He wanted to show the world that he was the future of wrestling and that these older stars were nothing more than stepping stones. And he wasn't alone in this mission. Orton was part of Evolution, a powerful faction led by Triple H, with Ric Flair and Batista rounding out the group. With these legends backing him up, Orton had the perfect mix of talent, attitude, and support to make the Legend Killer gimmick work. One of the first big moments of Orton's new persona came when he set his sights on Mick Foley. Foley was one of the most beloved and respected figures in WWE history. He wasn't the most athletic or the flashiest wrestler, but he had an unmatched toughness and willingness to put his body on the line. Fans loved him for his heart and dedication. So when Orton decided to target Foley, it was a big deal. The two had a brutal rivalry that led to a legendary no-holds-barred match at Backlash 2004. This wasn't just any match. It was violent, intense, and showed a side of Orton that fans hadn't seen before. At one point, Foley threw Orton onto a pile of thumbtacks, and instead of running away, Orton kept fighting. In the end, he defeated Foley, proving that he wasn't just talk. He was willing to take as much pain as he dished out. With that win, Orton cemented himself as a serious threat. He didn't stop with Foley, though. He went after Shawn Michaels, a wrestling icon known for his incredible matches and showmanship. He targeted Dusty Rhodes, a legendary figure who had been an inspiration to countless wrestlers. He even had a feud with Hulk Hogan, one of the biggest names in wrestling history. Each time, Orton made it clear that he had no respect for these legends. He would mock them, ambush them, and in some cases even spit in their faces. He wanted to show that their time was up and that he was the new face of WWE. One of the most intense rivalries of this period was between Orton and The Undertaker. Now, The Undertaker wasn't just any legend. He was one of the most respected and dominant figures in WWE history. Taking him down was no easy task. But Orton, alongside his father, Bob Orton Jr., was determined to do just that. Their feud was filled with mind games, sneak attacks, and even a fake funeral for The Undertaker, where Orton and his father mocked one of WWE's most beloved superstars. Fans were furious, but that was the whole point. WWE wanted Orton to be the most hated man in wrestling, and they were succeeding. But while the legend killer gimmick was working wonders for Orton's career, it also raised some uncomfortable questions. WWE had always prided itself on honoring the past and respecting the legends who helped build the company. But now it seemed like they were willing to sacrifice that respect just to make Orton look good. Fans started wondering if WWE was going too far. Was it really necessary to embarrass these legends just to push a young star? Did it hurt the legacy of these veterans to have them repeatedly beaten down and humiliated? Some fans loved it. They saw it as a passing of the torch, a way to show that the future of wrestling was in good hands. After all, wrestling has always been about creating new stars, and Orton needed to prove himself against the best. But others weren't so sure. Seeing icons like Dusty Rhodes, Hulk Hogan, and even The Undertaker getting taken down by a cocky young wrestler felt wrong to some. It was one thing for Orton to win matches, but the way WWE scripted him to outright humiliate these legends felt like it crossed a line. Despite the controversy, there's no denying that the legend killer gimmick was a huge success. Orton became a main event star because of it. He won the WWE Championship at just 24 years old, making him the youngest world champion in the company's history at the time. His confidence, arrogance, and in-ring ability made him the perfect villain, and fans couldn't get enough of booing him. Even after the legend killer phase ended, Orton continued to use elements of that character throughout his career. He never lost that edge, that attitude that made him such a compelling performer. Looking back, the legend killer era was a turning point for WWE. It marked a shift in how the company treated its past. Instead of always putting legends on a pedestal, WWE started using them to elevate new talent, sometimes at the cost of their own credibility. This approach worked in making Orton a bigger star, but it also changed the way fans viewed wrestling's biggest icons. Instead of being untouchable heroes, they started to feel like obstacles for the next generation. In the end, the Legend Killer run remains one of the most talked about storylines in WWE history. It made Orton a household name, gave fans some unforgettable moments, and sparked debates about how wrestling should balance the past with the future. Whether people loved it or hated it, they definitely remembered it. And in wrestling, that's what truly matters. The way WWE treats its legends has always been a sensitive topic. Some believe that the company should always honor and protect its biggest names, while others argue that wrestling is about evolution and that sometimes the past needs to step aside for the future. Whatever the case, Orton's Legend Killer run changed the game. It was a bold move that made him a star, but it also made fans think twice about what it really means to respect the legends of the sport.